7 women had come to Grey Castle, and 6 of them were lying. The first wept on cue. She claimed she had been the late Duke's secret wife, that there were letters proving it, that her son was waiting in the corridor, that a marriage had been solemnized one rainless August in a chapel since pulled down. Her tears fell where she had practiced them, in mirrors. The second did not weep. The second produced a ring. The third produced documents, 3 pages of contract, a dowry list, 2 seals pressed in red wax. The fourth produced witnesses. The fifth produced witnesses better paid. The sixth produced rage so cleanly performed that the candles in the great hall leaned toward her, the way candles lean toward draught. By the time the 7th stepped forward, Lord Adrian Halford, Duke of Grey Castle by accident of his elder brother's heart giving out 3 Tuesdays ago at a regimental dinner he had been too busy to attend, had ceased to look up from the silver clasp of his cuff.
He had not slept. He had not eaten since Sunday. He had not yet permitted himself to grieve. He listened to the 7th anyway, because his brother had been better at listening than at most other arts, and the listening was a thing he could still do for him. The 7th explained, with great feeling, that her son was the Duke's natural heir, that her son was at this moment in a carriage at the gate, that she expected to be received in the morning room by 10, and that she would tolerate no further indignities of this kind. "Madam," said Lord Adrian, in a voice that had once been pleasant in drawing-rooms, and was no longer pleasant anywhere, "I shall hear my 8th visitor." There was no 8th visitor on the list. The candles bent, heads turned. Half the hall rustled like skirts being arranged for a flight. Mr. Hadley, the steward standing at his shoulder, sleek as a varnished spoon, in an amber waistcoat that caught the light too well, stood very still indeed. In the corner, where the long velvet curtains swallowed the lamplight, and a chair had been left half pushed toward the wall, as though someone had meant to be invisible. There she sat. A young woman of 26 by the lamplight, pale gold hair braided plainly to her shoulder, clear, level grey eyes set wide in an oval face whose firmness, even now, was unmistakably feminine. A plain travelling dress of deep plum wool that the lamplight tried to make ordinary, and could not. Lord Adrian had no idea who she was. He had not, until this instant, been aware of her. And yet he had said, 8th visitor, and he had said it on purpose. He could not have explained why, except that there had been a stillness in that corner that had felt, for half an hour, like the only true thing in the room. The young woman rose. She did not curtsy. "You have not yet asked me anything, Your Grace," she said. Her voice was quieter than the others had been, and it carried farther. "But when you do, I shall be obliged to tell you something inconvenient." He considered her. The candles considered her. The 7 women, suddenly aware that the air in the room had moved without their permission, considered her too. "Speak." "The first 6 women are lying." She said it the way a magistrate reads a verdict, without heat, without cruelty, without permitting herself to enjoy it. "The 7th is not lying. The 7th is mistaken. Her late husband was a different duke. The village she names is 50 miles off, in a different county. She has confused you with the Duke of Marchwood, whose case she may pursue in the spring, when his lawyers wake." The 7th woman drew breath to speak. Charlotte Merritt did not look at her. "As for the others, the documents the 3rd woman has placed on your table are forgeries. They were forged last Wednesday, in your South Library, in the ledger room behind the orrery. I know because I was in the next chamber returning a book, and the door had been left ajar, and I saw who wrote them." Her hands stayed clasped at her waist. "The man who wrote them is standing behind your right shoulder." The room did not gasp. The room did something stranger. The room held its breath. Mr. Hadley, the steward, did not move. He did not, at first, breathe. Lord Adrian's hand closed slowly around the silver clasp of his cuff and unfastened it. He set the clasp on the table beside the 3rd woman's documents. He lifted his head.
"And what," he said, "is your name?"
"Charlotte Merritt, Your Grace. I am the housekeeper's niece. I have lived in this house 2 years and 4 months.
She paused. The candles in the great hall steadied. "That is the one true thing in this room tonight," she said. "Do with it what you can." He stood. He had not stood since the 7 women had begun. The chair scraped behind him with a sound that, in any other house, would have been ordinary, and that in this one, at this hour, with this many lies stacked on the long, polished table, landed like the first note of a thing the listeners did not yet have a name for. "Mr. Hadley," he said, without turning. His voice was level. His voice was lethal. "You will remain where you are." Then to the room. "Ladies, you will be conducted individually by my under-butler to 7 separate rooms. You will receive supper. You will not receive an audience tonight. You will not communicate with one another. The carriage at the gate may wait until morning. The boy in it may be brought a hot drink. We will resolve nothing tonight. Tomorrow we will begin again." 6 of the 7 did not move. The 7th, the mistaken one, was already weeping, but quietly, and not on cue. He turned at last to the corner. "Miss Merritt," he said, "you will follow me." She followed him. The corridor between the great hall and the Duke's study at Greycastle ran the length of 3 centuries. Portraits on either side. Watching. Adrian Halford had walked it 5 times a day since boyhood. He did not glance at his brother's portrait as he passed it. He could not. Yet. He held the door of the study open for her. She went in. He closed it behind them and turned the key. It was a small, deliberate gesture, and she understood it precisely. She understood that he was not locking her in. He was locking the corridor out. She felt the difference in her chest without being able to name it. The study smelled of old leather and cold smoke and lemon polish. A fire had been laid earlier and forgotten. The hearth was set with kindling that had not been struck. "Sit," he said. She did not sit. "You should sit, Your Grace," she said. "You have not slept, and you are about to ask me a great many questions. The chair on the right is more honest about your back than the one on the left." He looked at her. Then he sat, because she was right. "How?" he said slowly. "Did you know that?" "Your butler complains of carrying you to bed when you fall asleep upright in the left chair. He has complained twice this winter. He carried you Tuesday last." "And how do you know what my butler complains of, Miss Merritt?" "My aunt is the housekeeper, Your Grace. I help her in the mornings. The butler complains to her. She tells the kitchen tells the rest of us." "And you listen?" "Always." He almost smiled. He stopped himself before the muscle finished its work, because he had not yet earned the right, in his own estimation, to smile in that house. But she saw it begin, and she saw it fail. "Tell me," he said, "about my steward." She told him. She told him about a Wednesday 3 weeks ago, when she had gone into the South Library to return a volume of Linnaeus that her aunt had borrowed for the head gardener and forgotten to bring back. She told him that she had heard a quill scratching in the ledger room, and that the scratching had been wrong, too quick, too steady, and in a hand that was not her aunt's, not the understeward's, not the Duke's, and not anyone she had heard write at that desk before. She told him she had stopped, against her own better judgment, and looked. She told him what she had seen. "He had a sample of your father's hand," she said. "He had a sample of your brother's hand. He had a sample of yours. He had 3 nibs and 2 inks and a lamp turned low. He was copying. And he was weeping, in a polite, methodical way, the way a clerk weeps when a clerk has been told to do an unpleasant thing for the family. He was not weeping at being made to do it. He was weeping at having agreed. You watched him. For 4 minutes. Then I went away, because the floorboard outside that door is loose at the edge nearest the stairs. and shifts when one breathes. I have been quiet in this house for 2 years. He was upset enough to forget what he himself had taught the boys about that floorboard last autumn. And you said nothing? I had no one to say it to. She did not say it as accusation, she said it as fact. Your steward is the second most powerful man in the parish. My aunt is 62 and she works for him. The vicar drinks his port. The magistrate hunts on his recommendation. I am 26, and I have no money and no name, Your Grace. And I have learned to keep my own counsel until I was certain it would be heard. And what made you certain tonight? The 8th visitor. He looked up. You said, she said, that you would hear your 8th visitor. You meant the 7th, but you said 8th. And I had been sitting in that corner for 3/4 of an hour because my aunt had asked me to bring her thread that I'd forgotten to bring her at supper, and because it had felt, when I came in by the side door, like a room I should not leave. So when you said 8th visitor, you said me. And I thought, very clearly, he is asking. So I answered. He sat back. You answered, he repeated. Miss Merritt, do you understand what you have just done? I have made an enemy of your steward, who will see me dismissed within the week unless you intervene. I have made enemies of 7 women, 6 of whom would happily have me removed from a window, and 1 of whom is genuinely confused and may yet apologize. I have made an inconvenient witness of myself in a matter that will not be settled by a single evening's conversation. I have given you, she said, a problem larger than the one you walked in with, and I am sorry. You are not sorry. No, she said, I am not. But I thought I should say so. He let out a breath he had been holding since Tuesday. Miss Merritt, he said, I'm going to ask you one more thing, and I would like you to answer it as truthfully as you have answered everything else. Ask. What do you want? She did not look away. I want, she said, to keep my position in this house, because my aunt is too old to find another, and I would not leave her. I want my aunt's pension assured, whatever happens to me. I want, she said, slower now, not to be afraid when I walk past your steward in the gallery that he may have arranged a fall down the stairs by the laundry. I want the truth to be told, because tonight there were 6 lies in your hall, and I have heard lies told in fine rooms my entire life, and I would like, once, to see one of them answered. She stopped. She did not say, I want a great deal more than that. She did not say it because she did not yet know it herself, and she would not lie to him, and she did not yet know him. He nodded once, slowly. You shall have, he said, your aunt's pension. You shall have the safety of this house, and you shall have Miss Merritt, the thing I think you came here without knowing you wanted. And what is that, Your Grace? My ear, he said. I will hear what you have heard. Tomorrow I will need you, in this study, at 9:30. Bring your aunt. Bring whatever you have noticed in 2 years. Bring it all. Yes, Your Grace. Charlotte. He used her given name without ceremony, and she felt it land. Mr. Hadley will come to know, before the week is out, what you have said. He will move. We must move first. Do you understand? I do. Good. Then go and sleep. I will not. She went to the door. She turned back. There is one other thing, she said, that I should tell you tonight, while we are telling true things. Tell it. You called me your 8th visitor before you saw me. You should know, she said very evenly, that I have not been your 8th visitor. I have been your 8th servant in that corner since June. The first time was the morning after your brother. The morning after. Your housekeeper sent me to fetch a teapot. You were sitting at the long table looking at the silver clasp of your cuff, and you did not see me. I did not announce myself because you were not in a state to be announced to. I have come into rooms where you have been since, 11 times. You have not seen me on any of them. I would not normally tell you, but we are telling true things, and the count is 11. The 8th time was 3 weeks ago, the South Library, the day I saw your steward write the letters. That is how I came to be there. You were across the corridor. She opened the door. I will be in this study at 9:30. Good night, Your Grace. He sat in the honest chair and watched the fire that had not been lit, and did not move for a long time. 9:30 the next morning came earlier than 9:30 usually did in October. Grey Castle's east wing was raw with mist. The fields beyond the windows had gone the soft, damp brown of late autumn, and a single rook crossed the long view to the home wood at intervals, as though it had been hired to do it. Charlotte Merritt arrived at 25 past, with her aunt on her arm. Mrs. Witcher was a woman of 62, whose every joint had an opinion about the weather, and who had been head housekeeper at Grey Castle for 31 years. She had buried 2 husbands, a brother, a sister-in-law, and an exceptionally beloved spaniel. She had never buried an employer, and the loss of the late Duke had taken a piece out of her that she did not yet know how to carry. She looked, this morning, as though she had not been entirely certain her niece had not invented the previous evening. She looked also as though she was prepared, in either case, to deal with what came next. Lord Adrian rose when they entered. "Mrs. Witcher," he said. "Sit, please, both of you. Your Grace, my niece has done me a service I shall not forget. She has also placed herself and you at risk. I will speak to that risk this morning, with your permission." "You have it," said Mrs. Witcher firmly, and set her cane against the leg of the chair. He laid out, in 20 minutes, what he intended. He intended to summon the lawyers from town. He intended to retain, privately, at his own expense, a clerk from a house in Lincoln that did not know Mr. Hadley personally and would not be bought. He intended to produce, by the end of the week, a public statement of his arrangements for the inheritance. He intended to flush Mr. Hadley out by giving him something to fear, and he intended to name, that morning, an heir to the unentailed Grey Castle estate. "Your Grace," said Mrs. Witcher, who had managed not to interrupt up to that point, "the unentailed estate is 12 farms, the Dower House, the woolen mill at Saxby, the canal shares, 3 London leases, and the funds my brother put aside in his lifetime. Yes." "That is considerable, yes." "You cannot, Your Grace, be proposing—" "I am." "Not my niece." "Yes." Mrs. Witcher closed her mouth. She opened it. She closed it again. "You may say no, Mrs. Witcher," he said gently. "She may say no. I would not name an heir who has not consented. That is the kind of thing my steward does, and I should prefer not to resemble him this week. But I will tell you both why." He turned to Charlotte. "If I name a cousin," he said, "Mr. Hadley will know which cousin to court. If I name no one, Mr. Hadley will create an heir for me. 6 women he has already created, and he was not finished. If I name myself childless and let it lie, my brother's estate will pass, in 3 generations of legal grinding, into the hands of a man whose greatest pleasure in life is hunting. None of these outcomes I wish to be remembered for permitting. If I name you, Miss Merritt, a person no one has bought, no one has paid, no one has met before yesterday evening except in passing and unseen, Mr. Hadley will be unable to use you. He will be unable to discredit you, because there is nothing in your past to discredit. He will attempt to ruin you, and we will be ready for the attempt, because we have all morning to prepare for it. He will have to come at me directly, and when he comes at me directly, he will make the mistake that puts him in my magistrate's office. You will be a target, but you will be the target I can stand between. And in 10 weeks, when this is settled, I will release the inheritance, to whomsoever sense and law together advise me to release it to. The naming is a tactic. It is also, Miss Merritt, an apology. For last night, when I made you do a brave thing in front of 7 liars without asking your leave." Mrs. Witcher had not breathed for half a minute. Charlotte said, "I should like 10 minutes alone with my aunt, Your Grace." Of course. He left them. In the corridor he stood opposite his brother's portrait at last, and he looked at it, and he said, quietly, to the painted face that had always laughed too easily, "I'm sorry. I'm doing it crooked. You'd have done it straight. Forgive me. I haven't time to be straight." His brother's portrait did not answer. His brother's portrait did, however, continue to look as though it would have approved of Charlotte Merritt, very much indeed. Inside the study, Mrs. Witcher took her niece's hand. "Tell me, child," she said, "that you are not in love with that man." "I am not in love with that man, Aunt Witcher. I met him last night." "Tell me that you will not be." "I will," said Charlotte. "Tell you no such lies." Mrs. Witcher, who had no patience for fools and infinite patience for honest people, nodded once. "Then take it," she said. "Take it. He is right. The steward will not stop. Take it, child, and use it. And when this is finished, give half of it to the orphans at Saxby, and the other half to the school I have been writing to the late Duke about for 15 years and never had the courage to ask aloud." Charlotte kissed her aunt's temple. "I have always wanted to be a difficult woman, Aunt Witcher." "You always have been one, child. You only kept it polite." When Lord Adrian came back into the study, Charlotte was standing at the window. Mrs. Witcher was sitting very upright in the chair. "Your Grace," said Charlotte. "Yes, with 4 conditions." "Name them." 1. My aunt's pension is settled today, in writing, signed by your hand, witnessed by both lawyers when they arrive. She is not to be retired against her will. She is not to be removed from this house unless she chooses to leave it. 2. The naming is announced as a temporary trust. I am not the heir. I am the trustee of the unentailed estate for 10 weeks, at the end of which the property is settled by your decision and my consent jointly. 3. I am to be treated, in this house and outside it, as a person, not as a girl. I am to receive the lawyers. I am to read the documents. I am to ask the questions. If I ask a question and I am not answered, I will leave. I will not leave quietly. 4. When this is finished, when Mr. Hadley's in my magistrate's office, and the 7 women are pursuing their cases in the spring at the Duke of Marchwood's expense, and you have decided where the unentailed estate is to go, you will not, Your Grace, propose marriage to me out of gratitude. I will refuse it on principle. When you are no longer grateful, you may ask me again, and I will consider it on its merits." He looked at her. "Miss Merritt," he said, "conditions 1 through 3 are accepted with thanks." "And 4, Your Grace?" 4, he said, "I shall accept on the understanding that grateful is not the only thing I am at present, and that I am perfectly capable of telling the difference, and that I shall, in due course, prove the difference to your satisfaction." She felt heat at her throat, and she did not show it. "Then we are agreed, Your Grace." "We are agreed, Miss Merritt." The lawyers arrived at noon. The clerk from Lincoln arrived with them. Mr. Hadley arrived at 1:15, having been summoned. By 2 o'clock the announcement was drafted. By 3, signed. By 4, dispatched by riders to the parish church, the magistrate, the steward of the neighbouring estate, and the Lincoln paper. By 5, Mr. Hadley had begun to write a letter that would not arrive at its destination. At 5:30, Charlotte Merritt sat in the small parlour adjoining the study, with a stack of 3 years of Greycastle estate ledgers in front of her, and a pencil, and a candle, and her aunt's reading glass on a chain at her throat. She had told the Duke that she would begin where any sensible person would begin, which was by reading what had been written, in whose hand, and at what cost. He had said he would join her after dinner. He did not. He came at 10:30, looking guilty.
Miss Merritt, Your Grace. Sit. There is bread and cheese on that tray. My aunt sent it, knowing you would forget. Eat first. Eat. He ate. When the bread was gone, he looked at her properly for the first time that day, in lamplight, across a table piled with paper. Her hair had loosened. Her sleeves were turned back to the elbow, ink on the right wrist. Her eyes were the color of pewter in winter rain. "How bad?" he said. "He has been stealing for 11 years. "From my brother?" "From your father, originally. He began with the laundry accounts. He has finished," she said, "with the woolen mill. Roughly £40,000, allowing for the difference between what he has shown the family and what the mill itself has earned. He has not stolen all of it for himself, about 2/3. The rest he has pushed into your father's mistresses, your brother's gambling debts, and one quite considerable settlement on a woman in Bath, whom I do not think any of you knew about. He also seems, oddly, to have given £600 anonymously to the Saxby Orphan School, once a year, for 7 years. That's inconsistent, yes, or human, depending on your view. And the 7 women were not his idea, or rather, I think they were partly his idea. 3 of them I would say he found and prepared. 2 of them I think he heard about and used. 2 of them came of their own accord. He merely steered. To what end? To remove you, or to remove your name. With 7 competing claims unresolved, you spend 10 years in court while he runs the estate. With one of them succeeding, he runs it as the new Duchess's trusted advisor. With all of them defeated and the estate exhausted, he has by then retired. Either way, he wins. Miss Merritt? Yes. How, he said, did you do this in 6 hours? I have read every estate ledger in this house at night, on and off, for 2 years, because my aunt brings them home and falls asleep over them, and I cannot bear to leave a sum incorrect. He keeps 2 ledgers, Your Grace. He always has. I have been reading the wrong one. I have spent the afternoon reading the right one. He sat in silence. Charlotte, he said, if I had named a cousin, you'd have lost everything. And you saw all this in the South Library, 3 weeks ago, in 4 minutes. I saw a man weeping while he wrote his employer's hand. I went home and read harder. He stood. He came around the table. He did not touch her. He stood beside her chair and looked down at the ledger she had open, at the column of numbers in her steady, schoolroom-perfect handwriting, and he thought clearly. I have been Duke of this place for 3 weeks, and the woman who saved it from ruin is sitting in my parlour at midnight with ink on her wrist. And I have eaten her aunt's bread, and she has called me by my Christian name once. And I would rather die than disappoint her. Miss Merritt, he said, I owe you my brother's house. I would prefer, she said carefully, that you owe me nothing, Your Grace. I have been paid. Conditions 1 through 3. It is enough. It is not enough. It must be. She stood, gathered the ledgers, and went to the door. At the door she turned. Tomorrow, she said, I am going to confront him, with you in the next room. I want him to think he is alone with me. I want him to think I am 26 years old and have no name and no money. And I want him to make the mistake I have been waiting to see him make for 2 years. After that, the magistrates. After that, the lawyers. After that, you. Miss Merritt. Good night, Your Grace. She went up the back stairs. He stood in the parlour with her empty teacup and the broken bread. The day after that was the day Mr. Hadley made his first move. He was a careful man, Mr. Hadley. He had been a careful man for 35 years. Carefulness had carried him from a parish school in Norfolk to a stewardship at Greycastle by the age of 26.
the precise age the new Duchess not quite Duchess was now. He understood himself to be cleverer than the family he served, cleverer than the lawyers, cleverer than the magistrate, and certainly cleverer than the housekeeper's niece. Carefulness, however, has a brittle side. His first move was a letter to the Lincoln paper. The letter was anonymous. The letter alleged, politely, with the suggestion of regret rather than malice, that the new Duke of Greycastle had been observed, since his brother's death, in the company of a young woman of irregular position, that this young woman had been seen leaving the Duke's private study at midnight on the 2nd of October, that her reputation, never robust, had become a matter of comment in the housekeeping hall, and that the recent announcement naming her as trustee of the Greycastle unentailed estate would, if not immediately retracted, become a matter of public scandal. The letter was set in type by the Lincoln paper and shown, by the editor, to a second editor, who happened to play whist with the steward of Greycastle's neighbouring estate, who happened to play backgammon with the Duke's private clerk, who happened to be, by entirely deliberate arrangement, the clerk freshly retained from Lincoln. By 11 the next morning, the letter was on Adrian Halford's desk, unprinted, with a polite note from the Lincoln editor wondering whether the Duke would care to comment before publication, given the delicacy. Adrian Halford read the letter twice and laughed. He had not laughed in 4 weeks. The laugh was short and unkind, but it was a laugh, and it had Charlotte Merritt's name in it. "Hadley," he said to the empty room, "you are a fool." He sent for her. She came in with a smudge of charcoal across one cheekbone. She had been in the kitchens, she said, helping her aunt with the chimney that smoked. And she sat down in the honest chair without being asked, and she read the letter without comment. "He is a fool," she said. "He is a careful man." "He has been," she said. "He is no longer. He has done the one thing that lets us close on him publicly. Your Grace, I want him to print this." "Charlotte, I want him to print it. I want every gossip in 3 counties to read that I am your scandal. And I want, the morning after it prints, the editor of the paper, the steward of the neighbouring estate, your private clerk, and Mr.
Hadley himself in your magistrate's office, with my aunt and the under-butler and the head gardener as witnesses, to a conversation I am about to have with Mr. Hadley before tea. You are not going to confront him alone. I am going to confront him in the morning room, with the door open, and you in the library across the corridor with the door open, and the under-butler at the green baize door, and my aunt in the still room with the connecting door wedged. I will never be alone with him. I want him only to think I am alone." "And what are you going to say?" She told him. Adrian Halford listened. When she was finished, he said only, "Miss Merritt, have you done this kind of thing before?" "Yes." "With whom?" "My father's curate, when I was 19. He was lying about the parish funds. I cornered him in a vestry with a candle that was about to go out. When the candle went out, he confessed, because he believed the dark was God." "And was it?" "It was a damp wick, Your Grace, but it served." "And what became of the curate?" "He went to a parish in Wales. He has been honest there for 7 years. I write to his mother once a quarter. She sends me preserves." He looked at her for a long moment. "Miss Merritt," he said, "I should very much like, when this is over, to take you riding." "Your Grace, I do not ride." "Then I should like to teach you." "I have known how to ride for 15 years, Your Grace. I simply do not enjoy it. But I should like to walk with you. After, if you wish." "I wish." She left. He sat at his desk and listened presently to her quiet footstep moving down the corridor toward the morning room. The conversation in the morning room lasted 22 minutes. What Mr. Hadley did not know was that Charlotte Merritt had selected the morning room on purpose. The morning room at Greycastle had been built in 1742
by a duke who liked to overhear his guests. The corridor wall behind the large japanned screen was honeycombed with 3 listening tubes, one to the library, one to the still room, and one to the magistrate's pew at the parish church, though the third had been bricked up in 1810, and the Duke could think, he supposed, of 3 further uses for it before the year was out. What Mr. Hadley therefore did not realize was that everything he said to the housekeeper's niece in that 22 minutes was being heard, in real time, by the Duke of Greycastle, the under-butler, the head gardener, 2 lawyers, the clerk from Lincoln. The magistrate, who had ridden over after breakfast at the Duke's invitation, and Mrs. Witcher. He confessed in the 18th minute. He attempted to threaten her in the 21st. He attempted to bribe her in the 22nd. He used, in the bribe, the name of a woman in Bath. When the bribe failed, and Charlotte Merritt rose calmly and crossed the morning room to open the corridor door, what stepped through that door was not what Mr. Hadley had expected. It was the magistrate, in riding boots, with the Duke of Greycastle behind him, and the under-butler and the head gardener behind the Duke, and the Lincoln editor's polite note about the letter in the magistrate's hand. Mr. Hadley sat down very slowly on a small, upholstered chair that had not been upholstered for him. "Mr. Hadley," said the magistrate, who had known him for 19 years and did not look pleased to be doing this. "I am afraid we are going to have a long afternoon." The afternoon, in fact, lasted 3 days. There was a great deal of paper. There were 11 witnesses. There was the woman in Bath, who came up by post-chaise on the 2nd day at her own expense, and was received with great courtesy by Mrs. Witcher in the housekeeper's parlour, and given tea and sympathy, and a small private settlement that astonished her, because she had come prepared to be hated, and had been prepared to deserve it. There were the 7 women. The first 6 were dispatched, severally, by a barrister whom the new Duke had retained for a fee that made the lawyers wince, and the lawyers' clerks calculate their next bonus. The 6th wept honestly for the first time in her professional life, and, for a wonder, was not punished beyond the loss of her case. The mistaken 7th was sent, with kindness, a list of the next assizes at Marchwood, and a carriage as far as the inn at the crossroads. The boy in the carriage at the gate had been there only 1 night, and was returned to his mother with a hot drink and a small bag of apples. There were the lawyers. There was, 4 days later, a quiet announcement in the Lincoln paper, not Mr. Hadley's anonymous letter, which had been politely declined by the editor on legal advice, but a notice of the appointment of Miss Charlotte Merritt as trustee of the unentailed Greycastle estate, witnessed by His Grace the Duke of Greycastle, the magistrate of the parish, and one Mrs. Sarah Witcher, housekeeper at Greycastle for 31 years. There was, 5 days later, a quiet but sustained ringing of the doorbell at Greycastle by visitors who had read the announcement and had reconsidered, on reflection, their willingness to know the new Duke socially. Adrian Halford received none of them. He had, instead, asked his trustee whether she would care to walk in the home wood with him in the late afternoon, when the light through the beech trees did the thing it did only in October. She said yes. The home wood at Greycastle, in the 2nd week of October, smelled of fresh earth and turning leaves, and, faintly, of wood smoke from the gardener's cottage at the wood's edge. The path ran along a stream. The stream ran, that afternoon, with the particular clarity that comes after 3 nights of rain. They walked. He did not offer his arm. She did not take it. They walked at a steady pace, 2 strides apart, and they did not speak for the first quarter mile. "Charlotte," he said at last, "tell me about the curate." He was 34. He had been at our parish 2 years. He used the parish funds to buy a small printing press. He intended to print a book of his own poetry. He thought no one would notice the missing money. Did anyone, besides you? My father, eventually. My father is a country doctor. He noticed, because the apothecary's account was not paid for 3 months running, which my father had been paying out of the parish fund.
He came home one evening and said, "The account is unpaid. Have you noticed?" I said, "Yes." He said, "And do you know why?" I said, "Yes." He said, "And do you wish to do something about it?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Then do it. I shall be in the kitchen." And he made me a sandwich. "Your father is alive, Your Grace, and well, and currently treating a child for measles in Lincolnshire. He is not from this part of the country. He met my mother, who is no longer living, on a visit to my aunt. He stayed 7 weeks and took her home. I came 26 years ago. I came to Greycastle 2 years ago because my mother had been ill. After, I needed work. My aunt asked. Your brother said yes." "My brother," said Adrian Halford slowly, "knew you were here." "Of course he did. He came into the still room one Friday evening and asked my aunt, who had reorganized the linen. My aunt said, 'My niece.' He said, 'Thank her.' My aunt did. He asked the next week who had made the new system for the wine cellar. My aunt said, 'My niece.' He said, 'Thank her.' He did this 6 times, Your Grace, and on the 6th time he came to the still room himself and thanked me directly. He said, 'My brother is a good man and a tired one. He will inherit me one day, and when he does, he will need you.' He said, 'Do not let him send you away.'" She paused. "That was 9 months ago." Adrian Halford stopped walking. "He did not tell me," he said. "He would not have. He said it was his promise to himself, and not to be made into a request." "And you have been here, with that on your shoulders, since June?" "Yes." "And you said nothing of it?" "It was not my promise to make. It was a thing your brother had said. I was waiting to see what kind of man you would be when you came into the title. If you had been a fool, I should have left in the spring. You are not a fool, Your Grace. You are a tired man." So I stayed. He did not move for a long moment. The stream went on past their boots. A leaf, cherry red, came down out of an oak and stuck to the wet leather of his right boot. Charlotte Merritt looked at the leaf because she could not, just then, look at his face. "Charlotte." "Your Grace." "I am not grateful." "I know." "I am not grateful," he said again. "And I would not propose to you out of gratitude. I would propose to you because you are the most coherent person I have met in 7 years, and because you frighten me, in a calm way, the way a fire frightens a man who has been cold for too long. And because my brother, in his last act of love for me, put you in my path, and trusted that I would have the sense to recognize what he had done. I would propose to you, Charlotte Merritt, because in 9 days you have stood in 2 rooms and said the truth aloud, and changed the shape of my life. And I would be a coward in his memory if I did not at least tell you that. I would not propose to you today, because you would refuse me, and you would be right. But I would like—" And here he stopped, and he picked up the cherry-red leaf from his boot and held it absurdly in one ducal hand. "I would like to give you 9 weeks, Charlotte, the remainder of the trust. I would like you to be in my house, and in my study, and in my home wood, and in my brother's memory, for 9 weeks. And at the end of those 9 weeks, I would like to ask you a question, and I would like to do my level best between now and then to be the kind of man who is allowed to ask it." She took the cherry-red leaf out of his hand. "Your Grace," she said, Adrian, I will give you 9 weeks, and if at the end of 9 weeks you still wish to ask, I will answer. And what is the answer? I shall tell you when you ask." "That is unjust." "That is bargaining, Your Grace. I am 26 and have no money, and I have been instructed by my aunt, who is uncannily wise about these things, never to give a man a yes before he has earned the asking. Your aunt is a tyrant. My aunt is a romantic, Adrian. She had me practice the sentence in the mirror last night, in case you should ask too soon."
And if I had asked too soon? You would have heard a rather practiced no from a rather practiced mouth. Then I am glad, he said, that I waited. They walked on. The stream made its sound. The light went through the beech trees the way it does only in October, and only for about 6 minutes a day. A rook crossed the long view to the homeward, and seemed, this time, to slow over them and consider the leaf in Charlotte Merritt's hand. The Grey Castle Harvest Ball had been arranged, 3 years previously, by the late Duke's late wife, for the second Friday in October. The late Duchess had, in her last winter, made her husband promise that the ball would never be cancelled while the house had a roof to dance under, because she had been a great dancer in her time, and she believed dancing kept houses upright. The late Duke had kept the promise for 15 years. He had been gone 4 weeks when the 15th occasion came round. It would have been entirely correct to cancel the ball. Adrian Halford did not cancel the ball. He sent, in his second week as Duke, a quiet note to the steward of the neighbouring estate, who, having been politely interrogated for 5 hours in the magistrate's office, had returned home considerably chastened, asking him to convey to the families of the parish that the ball would be held in mourning colours with 1 waltz only, and that any family wishing to attend would be welcome, and any family wishing to stay away would be entirely understood. The reply came back the same day. Every family wished to attend. His new trustee, asked her opinion, had said only, "Your brother would have wanted them to come, so they should come. Wear black with the indigo waistcoat. It is the one your brother used to mock, and he would be pleased to see it on you." "How do you know my brother used to mock that waistcoat?" "He told my aunt he would give you 10 guineas to burn it. She declined the commission on grounds that it suited you. He said, 'That's what I'm afraid of.'" "My brother and your aunt were friends, Your Grace, as I think you suspected." "Adrian." "As I think you suspected, Adrian." The night of the ball, Grey Castle's great hall had been transformed. The 7 women's chairs were gone. The candles, 600 of them, had been laid out in 3 orderly chandeliers and along the picture rail. The polished long table had been carried out. The orchestra, 8 musicians from Lincoln who had played the late Duke's wedding and the late Duke's brother's wedding, and very nearly every wedding in the family for 40 years, had set up at the long end. The room smelled of beeswax and clean autumn air through the opened east doors. Adrian Halford, in a black coat over an indigo silk waistcoat that the late Duke would have given 10 guineas to burn, stood at the door with Mrs. Witcher on his arm and received his guests. Charlotte Merritt arrived 20 minutes after the ball had begun. She had been, she said, finishing a letter to the head of the orphan school at Saxby. She came in unannounced by the side door, in a gown of deep ruby silk that her aunt had had made up that week against everyone's better judgment, including Charlotte's, and that the late Duke's wife, having been lost before being able to wear it, had left in a trunk in the linen room, with a note saying simply, "For the next woman who needs it." Mrs. Witcher had given the note to her niece that afternoon. The room paused when she came in, the way rooms do when they have been waiting for something and only realize it on arrival. Adrian Halford turned at the door. He saw her cross the room. He saw the candles, predictably, lean toward her. He saw her aunt at the end of the long room, standing very straight, with both hands gripping her own elbows, the way she gripped them at funerals to keep herself upright. He saw the magistrate's wife, who had, 2 weeks earlier, declined to call on the housekeeper's niece, turn her head sharply and almost smile, in the manner of a woman who has just realized she will be sending an apologetic note in the morning. He saw Charlotte Merritt walk through the center of the room toward him, as though there were nobody else in it. She stopped 2 paces from him. She gave him, for the first time since they had met, a perfect, court-trained curtsy. "Your Grace, Miss Merritt. Your aunt sends her regards." "I have no aunt." "Yes, you do, Your Grace. She is 62 and is currently using my elbow as a cane. When are we to dance?" "Now." "I do not dance well." "I dance worse." "That cannot be true." My aunt has been describing your boyhood lessons for 6 years.
My boyhood lessons consisted of being trodden upon by a French dancing master who left before he could finish me.
Then we shall be a matched pair.
The orchestra took its cue. The room watched. The Duke and the housekeeper's niece, the trustee of the unentailed Greycastle estate, the woman in deep ruby silk, the woman whose name had been in the Lincoln paper as a notice of trust and not as a notice of scandal, danced one waltz. They danced badly. Adrian Halford was not a natural dancer. Charlotte Merritt was not a natural dancer. But they made up, in steady looking at one another, what they lacked in footwork. He held her at the proper distance. He did not pull her closer. He did not, he reflected later, need to. The not pulling closer carried more in that hall than any pulling would have. When the waltz finished, 2 of the dowagers near the picture rail were openly crying, and the magistrate's wife had taken out her handkerchief and was using it on her own face and pretending the candles had smoked. Mrs. Witcher, at the end of the long room, was no longer using her niece's elbow as a cane. She was using her own spine, and standing very straight indeed. Adrian Halford bowed over Charlotte Merritt's hand. He kept the bow precisely as long as etiquette permitted, and not a fraction longer. Miss Merritt. Your Grace. He went back to receiving guests at the door. She went to find her aunt. The orchestra began the next dance, and the room, which had paused in a way it had not paused in 15 years, resumed its life. It was as it should be. It was almost as it should be. It was nearly midnight when one of the 7 women came into the great hall. She was the second, the one who had produced a ring. She had not, for reasons of her own, gone home to London. She had stayed in the village inn, paying for her own bed with money she did not, in fact, possess, and waiting for a chance she was beginning to think would not come. The chance, in her view, was the ball. She had borrowed a gown from the innkeeper's daughter. She had borrowed a pair of slippers from the innkeeper's wife. She had come up to the great hall in a hired chair, and she had walked in by the front door without being announced, because the under-butler at the front door had been distracted by a small confusion involving a young lady's stuck button. She came into the great hall as the orchestra finished a country dance. She crossed the room toward Charlotte Merritt at speed. What she carried in her hand was not a weapon. The watching guests reported, afterward, in 12 different accounts, 12 different objects. In fact, what she carried was a small glass vial of red ink, intended, she had thought, in the village inn, to be flung onto the front of Charlotte Merritt's deep ruby silk gown, to ruin it visibly, and so ruin its wearer's evening, and to provide the steward of the neighbouring estate, who had assured her, in a carefully worded letter, that he would assist her case in the spring if she could embarrass the new trustee tonight, with the embarrassment he had requested. The second woman raised her hand. 3 things happened, very nearly simultaneously, in the next 2 seconds. Charlotte Merritt, who had spent 2 years observing this room from corners and had developed a precise understanding of how its sight lines flowed, saw the woman's approach in the polished surface of the brass rail, and stepped to one side without seeming to. Adrian Halford, who had been watching Charlotte all evening without seeming to, stepped between them, and Mrs. Witcher, who had been gripping her own elbows at the end of the long room and was 62 years old and a head shorter than the second woman, came up from behind with a candlestick in her hand and brought it down, with an aim that astonished her own niece, on the second woman's wrist. The vial dropped. The vial broke. The red ink spread across the polished floor in a small, spectacular pool, perfectly clear of any gown. The second woman gave a small, animal cry of pain. Adrian Halford caught her gently as she sagged against him. He did not pity her, exactly. He did not have the energy, just then, for pity, but he held her up with one arm and turned to the under-butler and said calmly, "James, find Dr. Carey. The wrist is sprained, perhaps cracked. He will be needed. Have her taken to the green room and looked after. She will eat and sleep, and tomorrow she will speak to me in the magistrate's office. And after that she will go home, and we will speak no more of this." Mrs. Witcher, 62 years old, head housekeeper at Greycastle for 31 years, owner of one disapproving cane and one previously unused candlestick, set the candlestick back into its place on the side table with a click, picked up her cane, and walked to the door of the great hall to wait for her niece. Charlotte Merritt looked at the red ink on the floor. She looked at her aunt. She looked at Adrian Halford. She did not speak, because if she had spoken, her voice would not have carried, and she had been raised to carry her voice. He saw her not speak. He set the second woman gently into the under-butler's arms, and he crossed the floor to Charlotte in 3 long strides, and he took her face in both his hands, as though she were a candle that had nearly gone out. He kissed her. In a great hall in front of 200 guests, in front of his housekeeper, in front of the orchestra, in front of the magistrate's wife who had her handkerchief out again, in front of the door, in front of the picture rail, in front of his brother's portrait, which had been carried down for the occasion, and which was looking on with what could only be described as warm satisfaction. The new Duke of Greycastle kissed the housekeeper's niece on the mouth, briefly and clearly, and without any uncertainty whatsoever about what he was doing. Then he drew back. "Charlotte," he said, audibly, to the room, "I beg your pardon. I have just done a thing in public that ought to have been done in private. I will apologize in private. I will not apologize in public. And I will not," he turned his head to the room, "permit anyone in this house to call this woman by any name other than her own." The room, which had been holding its breath, exhaled. The orchestra, after a glance from its leader, a man who had played the late Duke's wedding, and had been waiting for 15 years to have a story to tell about a Halford ball, began another waltz. Mrs. Witcher, at the door, finally permitted her shoulders to drop. She permitted herself, also, one tear, which she immediately scalded. Charlotte Merritt looked up at Adrian Halford. Her face was very pale, and her eyes were the colour of pewter in winter rain. "You have not earned that, Your Grace," she said quietly. "You have 9 weeks, and tonight is 12 days into them." "I know." "You have lost ground." "I know." "You have lost," she said, "approximately 3 weeks of ground." "That sounds about right." "You will," she said, "have to be considerably more patient than you have just been." "I know." "And you will have to apologize in private. I shall hold you to it." "Tonight?" "Tomorrow. Tonight my aunt is going to scold me. I should not like to keep her waiting." "Tomorrow, then." He bowed. She curtsied. They did not dance the next waltz. They did not need to. They had, for one evening, danced enough. The next morning, in the small parlour adjoining the study, Adrian Halford apologized in private. He apologized at considerable length. He apologized, Charlotte Merritt later told her aunt, with a thoroughness that almost defeated its purpose, in that by the 3rd quarter hour she had begun to wish very much for him to stop apologizing and do something else. But he did not do something else. He took her hand, once, formally, and he laid it carefully on the table between them, and he did not pick it up again. "I shall be patient," he said. "You shall be patient, Your Grace." Adrian. Adrian. The remaining 7 weeks were, for the household at Greycastle, the most prosperous and the most peaceful 7 weeks the house had known in a generation. Mr. Hadley had been removed quietly, on the 3rd morning, to a private cell in Lincoln, where he was awaiting trial in the spring. The 7 women had returned, by various means and in various tempers, to their usual places. The mistaken 7th had received, by post, a respectful invitation from the Duke of Marchwood's solicitors to lay out her case. The 2nd, the woman with the vial, had been seen to by Dr. Carey, fed, given the cost of a coach back to London, and had written, 3 weeks later, a short letter of apology that Mrs. Witcher had read aloud to the household with grim satisfaction and forgiveness in roughly equal measure. The unentailed estate, under its trustee, prospered.
Charlotte Merritt rose at 6 and went to bed at 11. She read every ledger. She wrote every letter. She received the lawyers, the magistrate, the understeward, newly appointed and enthusiastically loyal, and the head gardener, and the woolen mill manager, and the canal company's representative. She decided things. She was decided about.
She made one small mistake in the 3rd week about a dispute between 2 tenants over a hedge. She corrected it the following day. She wrote a personal letter of apology to the tenant with the smaller farm. The tenant sent her, in return, a basket of apples and a small carved wooden owl that he said his daughter had made, and that he hoped Miss Merritt would accept as an apology of her own for the harshness of his original letter. She put the wooden owl on the mantel of the small parlour. It stayed there. Adrian Halford was, throughout these 7 weeks, a man transformed by the simple condition of not being alone anymore in a house he had not asked for. He slept, at last, in the proper bed in the proper bedroom. He ate his aunt's, Mrs. Witcher's, bread. He answered his letters. He rode out every morning at 7 with his understeward. He came back every morning at 9:30, in time to find Charlotte Merritt at her desk in the small parlour, and to bring her his agenda for the day, and to receive hers in return, and to leave her alone for 2 hours with whichever of his lawyers she had summoned that morning. He did not propose to her again. He did not need to. He was building, every day, the case for the proposal. She watched him build it. She did not, at any point in those 7 weeks, give him to understand what her answer was going to be. She also did not give him to understand that her answer was anything other than the one he had asked her to consider. She walked with him in the home wood every Wednesday afternoon. She sat with him in the library after dinner on Fridays. She attended church with her aunt and with him. She did not let him touch her hand again, even formally. She said she did not wish for the household to gossip. He honored the request. He thought, privately, that the household had been gossiping cheerfully since the night of the ball, and was unlikely to stop. At the end of 9 weeks, on a damp morning at the beginning of December, Adrian Halford asked Charlotte Merritt to marry him. He asked her in the small parlour, in front of the fire, without ceremony, with her aunt, by her own request, sitting by the window pretending to embroider. He did not kneel. She had told him, some time previously, that she would never marry a man who knelt to her, because in her view a man who could be made to kneel could not be relied upon to stand later when standing was necessary, and she required, of any man she married, the latter rather than the former. He stood. He held a small velvet box in one hand. He did not open it. "Charlotte," he said. "Adrian. At the beginning of October, you came into my hall as my 8th visitor. You were not on the list. I asked you a question I had no right to ask. You answered with the truth. You have answered every question I have asked you since with the truth, and you have asked me questions I had not the wit to ask myself, and you have been patient with my answering, and you have built, in 2 months, a thing that this house has not known in 15 years. You have made my brother's last act of love into a living one. You have made his promise good. You have made me, in the smallest and most domestic ways, a man who can stand in his portrait without flinching. I told you, on a path in the home wood, that I would propose to you in 9 weeks if I had the right. The 9 weeks are tomorrow. I have nothing left to prove. I am not grateful. I am 10 things at once, none of them gratitude, all of them yours. Will you do me the honor, Charlotte Merritt, of becoming my wife?" She looked at him. She looked at the unopened velvet box. She looked at her aunt, who had stopped pretending to embroider. "Your Grace," she said. "Adrian. Adrian, I will marry you, on 3 conditions." "Name them." 1. My aunt's pension stands as written. My aunt remains housekeeper at Greycastle for as long as she chooses. She is not to be rebranded as the Duchess's aunt. She is Mrs. Witcher. She is the housekeeper. She is 62. She answers to no one but herself. 2. My trusteeship of the unentailed estate continues. I am the Duchess of this house, and the trustee of the unentailed estate jointly. The two roles are not inconsistent, and I shall not have one collapsed into the other. The half of the unentailed estate that I have already arranged to settle on the Saxby Orphan School and the new village school we are to build at Greycastle will be settled this winter, in writing, before the wedding. 3. You will not, ever, ask me to be a duchess in any sense that requires me to stop being myself. I have spent 26 years observing rooms from corners. I will continue to observe. I will continue to read. I will continue to ask the questions I have always asked. I will not become an ornament. I have been an absence in this house for 2 years. I will not, as your wife, become a decoration. I will be, as I have been, a working person, who happens to wear better gowns now and has someone in the proper bed. He smiled, for the first time, fully. Conditions accepted, Charlotte. Then yes, Adrian, I will. He opened the velvet box. The ring was not new. He had, he said quietly, dug it out of his mother's jewel case the day after the ball. It was a small grey pearl set in old gold, perfectly plain, and Charlotte had only to look at it to know that it had been worn by a woman who had also been a working person, who happened to wear better gowns. He put the ring on her finger. Adrian, she said, your mother would have approved of you so heartily that she would have terrified you. She had Mrs. Witcher's character and your father's stamina. She would have liked you within an hour and made you cry with laughter within a week. She has been, he said, the only person whose silence I have minded these last 8 years. I think tonight, perhaps, I shall not mind it quite so much. Mrs. Witcher, in the corner, did not pretend to embroider. She got up, with the help of her cane, and crossed the room, and kissed her niece's forehead and the Duke's cheek in that order, and said, About time, Adrian. You're terrifying, Mrs. Witcher. I have been, dear, since 1788. Now sit down. There is bread in the kitchen, and I am going to fetch it. You will eat it, both of you, before you do anything else, because in this house we eat first and weep second. That is how houses last. She went to fetch the bread. The wedding took place at the parish church on the second Saturday in January. Mrs. Witcher gave the bride away, having declared that any uncle or father coming up by mail coach in winter would only catch a cold and disappoint everyone, and that she had been giving the bride away in spirit since June, and might as well do it in person. The bride wore deep ruby silk. The groom wore black with the indigo waistcoat. 6 months later, on a soft afternoon at the very end of June, when the home wood at Greycastle smelled of green leaves and warm earth, and, faintly, of wood smoke from the gardener's cottage at the wood's edge, the new Duchess of Greycastle was found, by her husband, sitting on the low wall behind the still room, in a plain morning dress, with a stack of estate ledgers beside her, and her aunt's reading glass on a chain at her throat, and a small carved wooden owl in one hand. She was turning the owl over in her fingers and looking at the home wood. He came up quietly. He sat down on the wall beside her. He did not speak for a moment. Charlotte. Adrian. You have been at those ledgers 2 hours. I have been finished with the ledgers for an hour and a half. I have been thinking. About what? About, she said, the 2nd of October. About a corner in the great hall. About a man who said he would hear his 8th visitor. He took her hand. Her hand was warm from the sun. There was no ink on the wrist. She still wore her aunt's reading glass on its chain, because she liked the weight of it, and because she would always be the housekeeper's niece, even now, even with the small grey pearl set in old gold on her finger. Charlotte. Adrian. 9 weeks ago today, the trust was dissolved. It was. You have not asked me what I did with the unentailed estate. You will tell me when you are ready. I imagine you have settled half of it on the schools, as we agreed. I imagine you have settled a quarter of it on Mrs. Witcher and on the staff, by long-promised pensions. I imagine the last quarter is... I do not know. The last quarter, he said, is yours. In your name, in your own right. Not as my wife. As Charlotte Merritt, which is who you have been since June, and who I shall continue, in private, to call you when I am being insolent. She did not immediately answer. Adrian. Charlotte. You have, she said carefully, made me an heiress in my own name. I have, as a small private joke between us. You named me your heir for 10 weeks. I did. And then you married me. I did. And now you have made me my own heir. I have. She turned the small carved wooden owl over in her hand. The owl had been on the mantel of the small parlour for 9 months. She had taken it down that morning to bring out into the sun, because the wood had begun to dry, and she liked to hold things that had been made by hands. Adrian, she said, I have not yet told you the only true thing I have been keeping from you. Tell it. I love you, she said. She had not said it before. She had not let herself say it before. She had been waiting, she had told her aunt, once, 2 months ago, in the housekeeper's parlour at midnight, for a moment that did not feel borrowed from anyone else's wedding day or anyone else's novel, and that did not feel like a thing she was saying because it was expected. She had been waiting for a Wednesday afternoon or a Saturday morning, or, as it turned out, a Sunday in late June, on a low wall behind the still room, with a small carved wooden owl in her hand, and her husband beside her, and the home wood smelling of green leaves and warm earth. She had been waiting, she now understood, for a time when nothing in the world was about to go wrong, a time when no one was about to die, and no one was lying, and no one was producing documents, and no one was producing rage, and no one was, even, watching from a corner. She had been waiting for the room to be empty of all the other true things, so that this one could fill it. He looked at her. He did not weep. He was a man who had come, in 9 months, to understand that there were things that did not require weeping, and that this was the best of them. He said, Charlotte, I love you. I have loved you since the 2nd of October, in my hall, when you said, that is the one true thing in this room tonight. I have loved you so steadily since then, that I have almost lost the ability to remember what it felt like to live without loving you. I shall, I hope, never have to remember it again. She put her head against his shoulder. The home wood went on with its afternoon. A rook crossed the long view. The light, even in June, did the thing it does between the beech trees. They sat there for a long time. After a while she said, Adrian, Charlotte, have you eaten? Not since breakfast. Then come inside. My aunt will scold us both, and I shall be glad of it. There is bread, and there is cheese, and there is a letter from the head of the orphan school at Saxby that I would like to read with you. There is also, he said, the small matter of 7 women in the Lincoln paper this morning. What about them? The first has remarried. The second has opened a millinery in Bath. She has named it, with what I think is great courage and a certain dry humour, The Vile. The third is in Australia. The fourth and fifth have written to the magistrate jointly to confess, in exchange for a reduction of their sentences. The sixth has, against all expectation, applied to my aunt for a reference, claiming she has reformed. My aunt is deciding. The seventh, the mistaken one, has written to thank you. Her case at Marchwood was successful in the spring. She wishes to send your aunt some apples. Send words to her aunt, to my aunt, to expect them, Charlotte said. And tell the seventh that she is welcome here on a Wednesday afternoon in October, when the light through the beech trees does the thing it does only in October. I shall. And Adrian. Yes.
"The truth," she said, "has been told. It has. Do with it what we can." "I think," he said, "we already are." If you have ever sat in a corner of a room and wondered whether anyone would notice you were there, if you have ever had a true thing to say and not yet found the right room or the right hour or the right person to say it to, then, dear listener, this story has been for you. Tell me in the comments the truest thing you have ever told without being asked. And subscribe, if you would, for next Friday's tale. We shall be opening another door at Grey Castle, and the Homewood is still listening, 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 is still